Welcome, everyone. My name is Kate, and we have the great pleasure of Tory Clark being here tonight. So I'm going to introduce her. Many of you already know her, and there's a lot of new faces here for the CIIS Psychedelic meeting. So welcome. Really excited. We've been really looking forward to this. For those of you that don't know Tory is a licensed marriage and family therapist with a broad-ranging background in health and human services. She holds a master's in public health and a doctor of human sexuality, served as a firefighter for the city of Reno for 8 years, taught at the University of Nevada, Reno for 9 years, and has a certificate in psychedelic-assisted therapies and research from the California Institute of Integral Studies in San Francisco, California. Drawing from this diversity of education and experiences, Tory integrates the connection between body, mind, and spirit into working with her clients. She deeply believes in her own ongoing personal exploration, which is an integral piece that informs her therapy practice and keeps her humble and true to her life's journey. I would also like to add that Tory is a dear friend. I have learned so much and continue to learn so much from Tory. I admire her greatly. She is a high-level subject matter expert with a depth of wisdom and so much passion, and I can't imagine anybody I would rather speak to this topic, which is so layered and nuanced. So I'm glad we can all share this moment together, and without further ado, I will hand it over to you, Tory.
We need to give another round of applause for Kate. Yeah. SPS wouldn't exist without her, so she's done so much. So thank you. And thanks for setting this room up and the blackout curtains so I could have a PowerPoint because I can't remember everything that I'm going to talk about. So it's so nice to have that. And thanks to all of you. Just take a minute to look around the room. Like there's this web, this mycelium web that grows here in Reno, right? All of you people. So I want to thank my husband Justin back there. When I signed up to do this presentation, it's kind of like when you sign up to do a psychedelic journey, they say that's when it starts. Because the unconscious starts up, and it starts to get a little freaked out. And so, months ago when I was talking about this topic, I started going a lot more into my own darkness. So a real parallel process to go into. So yeah, it's been fun. If we can make sure that phones are off and then save questions to the very end, because I'd like to take you on a journey, and it's a presentation that has a lot of info in it, some small group discussion that we're going to do, and I'd like to also serenade you with some poetry from different people, because the language with this medicine work, I use medicine and psychedelics a lot interchangeably, just so you know. Language fails, I think, a lot of times, but there's some really good pieces I would like to read off and on throughout tonight, you guys. So, and the other piece, there's a lot of information, and many of you will have your own definitions and ways of knowing, but I just really would like to say, if you meet Buddha on the road, kill him. That means if you think you've got it all figured out, and you got to kill that belief and keep searching and keep your mind open for your information and your seeking, your exploration. Okay, so let's start with this cartoon. The businessman's flying to the top of the mountain to meet the guru, and he says, "What's the meaning of life? But make it quick. I've got an important meeting in a half an hour." And this is kind of, we're looking for this relief with psychedelics and the quick fix and the quick pace of our culture, and just go, 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 go. So let's just slow down tonight and just really take it easy and remember who we really are here. So I have what I call the wise elders of the darkness. These are my book mentors, so to speak, that framed my presentation. And I would say, we stand on the shoulders of giants. But let's be honest, we stand on the shoulders of indigenous people and their cultures. This medicine work has been around long before all of these people came into play, this psychedelic renaissance, and we really need to pay respect and our reverence. But I'm going to speak to this. This is what I know of. I'm going to weave in a little bit of different indigenous ways, but this is mostly, from my training and these people. And I'll just tell you about them briefly, because they deserve that. Bill Plotkin, he would describe himself as a recovering psychologist. He owns the Animus Institute, and you can go on deep dive journeys at his place into the wilderness. That's where the soul is in nature. And he's written Soulcraft and the Journey of Soul Initiation, and I use a lot of his material tonight. And then he uses an awful lot of Dr. Carl Jung. Raise your hand if you know or have heard of Dr. Carl Jung. Perfect, and we're going to use a lot of his material. Swiss psychiatrist, and he's lived so many lives. I started reading even more of his material, and it just goes on and on and on. And he dove into the darkness and into his psyche without a roadmap, without guides from others. But he did study a lot from the indigenous ways, and he even lived in Africa a little bit, in Egypt, and he brings a lot to us in regard to the darkness. Marion Woodman, she is a female psychoanalyst out of the Jungian tradition, and she just passed a few years ago, but she had a breadth of knowledge around the feminine consciousness and femininity. Robert A. Johnson, Jungian, he wrote Owning Your Own Shadow, Inner Work, where you can really learn more about your dreams and guided imagery. Joanna Macy, one of my favorites, eco-psychologist, she's 93, and she has been talking about the great unraveling, moving from an industrial growth society to a life-sustaining civilization, talking about what we are doing to this planet, destroying it. So she's still out there. Joseph Campbell, raise your hand. Joseph Campbell, we know who that is. Hero's Journey. George Lucas created Star Wars from him. So he, in all the mythology. Pema Chodron, Buddhist, ordained nun, and she wrote The Places That Scare You, When Things Fall Apart, my personal favorite book that I went to a lot when COVID hit. Ram Dass, you know who that is, right? Ram Dass, Timothy Leary. Timothy Leary stayed here, preached psychedelics. Ram Dass went to India and then came back and has been, such a wisdom, a sage for us. Thomas More, Dark Nights of the Soul. Lots of Thomas Moores out there, but this one, he's still alive, and he wrote the book Dark Nights of the Soul, which we're going to talk about tonight. Francis Weller, he's going to be in Grass Valley coming up in May. I suggest you check him out. He's our expert on grief. He does deep dives into grief work, and we're going to talk a bit about grief tonight. Stan and Christina Groff. Stan, he'd be called the godfather of LSD. Albert Hoffman, the father of LSD, so he would say Stan's the godfather. Stan Groff he's still alive, 91, and he has done extensive work. It just goes on and on in regard to psychedelic land. He and Christina, she's passed now, they developed holotropic breath work together. Christopher Beisch, raise your hand if you've heard of Chris Beisch. A couple of you. He has written, in my humble opinion, probably one of the most seminal pieces of work on psychedelics to date. It just came out a few years ago. It's called LSD and the Mind of the Universe. From 1979 to 1999, he did 73 high-dose LSD journeys based off of Stan Groff's protocols. When I say high dose, he was hitting 500 to 600 mics of LSD. He went into the darkness. And that book, what he went into, I highly suggest you read it. Joshua Michael Schrei. He is the author right now of the most current podcast out, The Emerald. And it's excellent. Check it out, The Emerald. He ties in mythology, psychology, cosmology, science, and he brings it all into what's happening to us today, brings that all together to teach us. Kitty Unthank, that's my therapist, Jungian, that I've had for the last 12 years. very wise. And then Mark Seelig, he would not call himself a shaman, but he is a true medicine man, a mentor to both my husband and I. All right, let's dive in. We're gonna drop in together real quick. I just want to invite you to close your eyes and just notice your breath. I'll talk here for a bit. I'll give you the cue when you can open your eyes again, if you're comfortable with that. Notice what's coming up, your emotions, just riding here today, how you're feeling in your body, where there might be tightness, tension. Notice just what's coming up for you right here, right now. Just breathing slowly, dropping in. I'd like to introduce you to a word, one that you've probably never heard before. And it's Kartsaluni. Kartsaluni. And it comes from the Inuit tribe, indigenous people of the Arctic, and it means sitting together quietly in the dark, waiting for something unexpected to happen. Or as wise elder Francis Weller would say, the patience to listen to the dream of the earth. Tonight, as we descend on a journey into the darkness, we will learn more about listening to our soul, not our ego, but our soul, and merge with the dream of the earth. We've all developed so many great defense mechanisms that block out what our soul is trying to show us. I invite you to take a flashlight into your own dark places this evening with courage, compassion, and curiosity. All emotions are welcome here. Everything about you is welcome here. Within this very lifetime, may we meet our shadow selves and understand the hidden treasures that lie within. I just want to give you some flight instructions for what we're going to do in a bit. We're going to get into some small groups. And while you're in the groups, I just want you to drop your day job, just asking questions and listening. No advice giving, teaching, interpreting, therapizing, my favorite. Drop into your experience only. Before that, though, I want to read you a poem by David White called Sweet Darkness. When your eyes are tired, the world is tired also. When your vision has gone, no part of the world can find you. Time to go into the dark where the night has eyes to recognize its own. There you can be sure you are not beyond love. The dark will be your home tonight. The night will give you a horizon further than you can see. You must learn one thing. The world was made to be free in. Give up all other worlds except the one to which you belong. Sometimes it takes darkness and the sweet confinement of your aloneness to learn. Anything or anyone that does not bring you alive is too small for you. All right. Let's talk about bad trips. Notice I have it in quotation marks. More about that in a bit. So let's just get with like 3 people, maybe even somebody you don't know, but you know, it might be too hard to move around in here. So just groups of 3, if you can manage that. And you know, raise your hand if you've had a difficult or a bad trip. You've had something that's come up that's been tough. You know, so share as you may with these questions or not, we're just dropping in together. So here's your questions. And I'll give you about 5 minutes to just chit chat, and even if you haven't had a tough trip, listen to what the other people have to say. Sound like a plan? All right, go. Yes, we need to continue this, huh? Everybody had a story or a story to hear? Yeah. Lots of excitement in the room. So raise your hand if you can relate to one of these 7 dimensions in your journey, your journey fell into one of these. You can relate to one of those, yeah, or a lot of them, not just one. Okay, so this is the challenging experience questionnaire, and there's the 7 dimensions that they found. This was done with Barrett and also Roland Griffiths. Some of you guys might know Roland from his deep research into psilocybin and cancer, who is actually dying of cancer, sadly. So anyhow, they developed this questionnaire to give to people as they go through after their journey, and this is what they have found with these 7 dimensions. So just wanted to, we'll come back to this toward the end. But let's talk about bad trips though, and how important our narratives are around them and the stories we tell. From this study, they found with our stories that, people, we live by our stories. And life is in many ways a continuous enactment of stories. Much human connection and bonding are established through storytelling. Emotions and experiences are shared and made relatable through personal narratives. On a more individual level, narratives are central to the construction of our identity and of ourself. So important to share our stories. Let's take a look at some of the stories people had from their challenging experiences, and I'm sure you can relate. This one, he says, I experienced what it was like to go crazy. It was much worse than torture and death. Because you're stuck in your head, and it's even worse when you know that you're stuck. Suddenly a thought pops into your head, did I just go crazy? Usually you know, and you can just brush something like that off and be like, fuck this shit. Now it was like, yeah, maybe, yes, maybe, no. It was on repeat in a loop. So, relate to that one. This one, I looked in the mirror, first mistake. Saw my gigantic pupils. It was like, oh no, it's happening. I got really nervous and anxious that this was going bad. I planned to buy myself a one-way ticket to Tibet and find a monastic order and live there the rest of my life. Alternatively, just disappear from everything because I thought that there was no way back. Now, like, it's all done. So, this one, the worst bad trip I've had was the time I took the highest dose of LSD I've ever taken. I got overwhelmed, probably because I was the most experienced person in the room, so I felt kind of responsible. I was tired and overworked at that time, and I lay there for 4 or 5 hours, convinced that I'd become psychotic and would never get well again. This one is some good insight. The bad trips are what gives you the most insights. It's the bad trip that shows you some side of yourself that you perhaps have tried to diminish, that probably are the most important ones to understand. These are insights about who you really are, who you've been, what you've done right. You have to see your flaws to be able to work through stuff. So hard to remember when we're in that muck, huh? And then toward the end of the study, they talked about how in effective psychotherapy, it changes patients' meaning-making process. Frank and Frank show that when entering psychotherapy, patients often present a narrowed view of themselves, designed as a maladaptive framework of meaning, based on fixation and rigid rules, preventing fruitful meaning-making. So bad trip stories may enable us to break these fixations, opening up to more flexible meaning-making. I underline flexible for a reason. There is increasing evidence suggesting that such unpleasant experiences may also be important for the therapeutic effect of psychedelics. So creating that flexibility in our minds. We get, those neural pathways that it's so burned in there. And so sometimes these quote unquote bad trips, are the good trips. So I found this article along with bad trips, and it came out of Harvard, Theological Reckoning with Bad Trips. And this Rachel Peterson, she was one of 12 of religious clergy that was chosen from New York University to undergo high-dose psilocybin. So it's pure psilocybin, but the equivalent would be taking 5 to 6 grams. One of the requirements for these people was no prior psychedelic experience. This was rough. And these are theologians. These are people who have a lot of book knowledge. about the mystical, right? And then they're thrown in to a deep experience with a big dose. She writes this paper and she just goes off on the experience and how tough it was and that we need more sophisticated assessment of the experiences and raises some great points. But what I found so interesting at the end of her article was this paragraph. I am left with the question, why? The irony is that the clinical container facilitated an experience that seemed to lay bare the very limitations of that container. Some days I think psychedelics healed me by not healing me at all, which may just mean that they made me more comfortable with paradox. In a humble commitment to unknowing is where I now make my home. Paradox and the unknowing. We don't like that at all, right? So let's talk about paradox for a second because it's going to chase us all through this journey tonight. Paradox, it means paired opposites. One can't exist without the other. The world and the psyche are constantly seeking balance. Upper, lower, male, female, light, dark, spirit, soul, right, left, creation, destruction, the ascent and the descent. Marion Woodman, she says that we are constantly confronting the paradox that we're an eternal being that's dwelling in a temporal body. So hard to wrap our minds around. And then Thomas More says, that which seems to have twisted your life or personality for the worst is the very thing that will heal you and give you meaning. So I'm going to read a poem. You can go within or you can watch me read, whatever you want to do. This is called Kindness, and it's by Naomi Shihab Nye, and this is about paradox. Before you know what kindness really is, you must lose things. Feel the future dissolve in a moment like salt in a weakened broth. What you held in your hand, what you counted and carefully saved, all this must go so that you know how desolate the landscape can be between the regions of kindness. How you ride and ride, thinking the bus will never stop. The passengers eating maize and chicken will stare out the window forever. Before you learn the tender gravity of kindness, you must travel where the Indian in white poncho lies dead by the side of the road. You must see how this could be you. How he too was someone who journeyed through the night with plans and the simple breath that kept him alive. Before you know kindness is the deepest thing inside, you must know sorrow is the other deepest thing. You must wake up with sorrow. You must speak to it till your voice catches the thread of all sorrows and you see the size of the cloth. Then it is only kindness that makes sense anymore. Only kindness that ties your shoes and sends you out into the day to gaze at bread. Only kindness that raises its head from the crowd of the world to say, it is I you have been looking for. And then goes with you everywhere like a shadow or a friend. Paradox, paradox. So we're going to go over a few definitions because we got to have some common language as we're moving through this journey. And big words, right? Spirit, soul, ego, and just so overused in our language. And then upper world, middle world, lower world. We're going to get into some more detail. So let's start with spirit. This is the great single and eternal mystery that permeates and animates everything in the universe, and yet it transcends all. It points to what all people and all things have in common. Each of us a facet of the one being that contains all of us. And movement towards spirit is a journey toward ascent. So you think of the realms ascending. And then our soul. This is the vital, mysterious, and wild core of our individual selves. It's an essence that's unique to each of us, qualities found in layers of ourselves much deeper than just our personalities. This quote was great that I heard. My friend Melissa sent me this podcast, and this author said, it's the drop of the divine that has been planted in each one of us, every single one of us, a drop of the spirit in us. Soul is ultimately an agent for spirit. And it's encountered in our subconscious, what lies below our awareness. which we're going to talk about in depth, and movement towards soul. It's a journey of descending. Our focus tonight. The ego. Woo! So, this is our everyday conscious self, and it's a structure that allows us to regulate these energies and emotions to be human. You know, the existence of it's for better or for worse. I wouldn't be able to appear standing as Tory talking to you without my ego, and each one of you sitting here in your identities is your ego listening, okay? So it can be terrifying to begin to lose or to lose it in a journey. Am I right? That fractaling that will start to happen, so scary. But a well-balanced ego is necessary. It's a necessary carrier of the gift of our soul. Gotta have it. There's so much lingo out there about, like, I gotta blast through the ego dissolution. Okay, but you know, we need our egos. We need them and to make friends with them. So each of these terms I just went over developed. 3 realms of human development that Bill Plotkin talks about here. And these are places, these are realms of development. Okay, so let's go into these. Our upper world. This is a home of the spirit. It's characterized by unity or non-duality, grace, bliss, transcendence, emptiness, enlightenment, the anima, the breath of life. James Hillman, Union, he talks about the breath of life that we all have and that we're surrounded by. We surrender our attachment to our individuality, and we learn to transcend both ego identification and soul identification, and then we see through the illusion of the separate self. One of my favorite quotes is by Thich Nhat Hanh, who just passed, and he's a Vietnamese monk, and he would say, we're here to awaken from the illusion of our separateness. I love that. And we go to this upper world through meditation, yoga, prayer, psychedelics. We can transcend in these ways. Middle world. This is where we struggle. It's the home of our ego. And it's our everyday waking identity, our job, our kids, our work, our businesses, our environment. And we're here to heal during this time in this middle world, our emotional wounds and trauma, develop our personal bonds, our families, our loved ones. But the ego, it's never finished. And it takes so much time and effort to work on and grow while we're here on this planet. Adequate ego growth is it's essential to our personal well-being. We cannot bypass it through psychedelics or otherwise. We cannot do it. Or the spiritual bypassing that goes on a lot with doing this medicine work. Chris Beisch, he talks about psychic inflation in this book. And he says, we have to be brutally honest with ourselves that psychedelics, they take us to these other realms of consciousness that are so far beyond our pay grade. But we experience these amazing places and then we come back, and just because we've experienced, you know, these profound, deep experiences, that doesn't make us a deep, profound person. We have to take time to integrate what we learned on that journey and to slow down and do that. Okay, lower world. This is where we're going. Realm of our soul. It's characterized by depth, the darkness, demons, death, the dead, our sacred wounds, our shadow. It's the unknown and not yet known parts of ourselves and the visions of personal culture and our destiny. Marion Woodman says, when we enter it purposefully, it becomes a time of soul making versus being abducted. How many of you guys have just been abducted unexpectedly by your journey? Or not even your journey. I mean, how many, like with divorce, death of a loved one, your retirement, loss of your job, all these ways that can just sneak up us and take us down into that darkness. And really, that's the soul-making process. Bill Plotkin, I love this quote. It is truth. This is what blocks us from our souls. He says, many people fill their days with 1,001 distractions in an attempt to muffle the cries of their souls. Often these distractions become our addictions. Consumerism, eating disorders, substance abuse, compulsive sex, pornography, workaholism, religious fundamentalism, obsessive thrill-seeking, gambling, excessive TV watching, Netflix, all of which that further contribute to the deterioration of our world, because we're just so distracted from who we really are. Another poem. Is that okay with you guys? All right, this one. Prospective Immigrants, Please Note, by Adrienne Rich. Either you will go through this door or you will not go through. If you go through, there is always the risk of remembering your name. Things look at you doubly, and you must look back and let them happen. If you do not go through, it is possible to live worthily, to maintain your attitudes, to hold your position, to die bravely. But much will blind you, much will evade you. At what cost? Who knows? The door itself makes no promises. It's only a door. Okay. I'm gonna open the door, let's descend. Who are my Lord of the Ring geeks in here? This is Balrog, the fiery demon of the depth that the dwarves, and when they went through the mountain of Mordor, woke up. So let's go into a little bit more darkness here. Plotkin, he says, the initial goal of our descent is to cultivate a relationship between our ego and the soul. And that's underworld business. And it's business that might at first make our surface lives more difficult or lonely or less comfortable, secure, happy. Have you guys experienced a little bit of this before? Yeah, this is hard work. But boy, it's just essential. Hard to keep the faith when you're in this underworld. But people, the good news is that lots of people have felt this pull to soul since the beginning of time. Here's just a couple. In mythology, numerous stories of the descent. Persephone, Beowulf, Orpheus. We have Jesus, St. Teresa of Avila, John of the Cross, who we're going to talk about, Carl Jung, going into this darkness of the soul. The hero's journey, Star Wars, Lord of the Rings. Does anybody else have any other favorites? No? We love this stuff, right? We love it when when we get to watch it and we project our gold of what's inside of us onto these people that take these journeys and the movies we watch. But we have forgotten that this spiritual descent, we act as if it's no longer necessary. But it's meant for every one of us, not just the heroes and the heroines of mythology. We have a lot of resistance to darkness, and rightfully so, right? This resistance, is about leaving our commonplace, our family, our familiar way of understanding ourselves to go into our own darkness. We like routine, we like to labels and to know exactly where we're going. We have a big influence from Western religious traditions that associate the descent with hell and evilness, entering into sinful, suicidal, one-way trip for all of our sins. I'd also like to add here that Just Say No from Nancy Reagan, that really messed me up with going into journeys. The egg frying in the pan. Oh, the episode with Oprah that MDMA was burning holes in the brain. All those things, it just makes it so hard to go in and trust. This is a presentation all of it itself, our traumas and the many defense mechanisms we have. Proceed with caution. They're there for a reason, and we have to tend to them gently. And so blasting through can be so difficult and take us into places that we just never knew were there in our unconscious. And then we're coming back up trying to put those pieces together. Nature is rendered as evil, wild, unruly, needing to be tamed. We learn to fear nature in our soul, which is our true essence. We're so detached from nature, our humanity, but that is what we are a part of. And then, of course, encountering a demon, that shadowy element of ourselves, in our unconscious, and it guards the passage. What's in this darkness? Let's go further. This is a great quote by Groff and his wife. As the gates of the unconscious mind open, a wide variety of repressed emotions and recollections can be released into conscious awareness. So you think of this, for those of you who have read like The Doors of Perception with Aldous Huxley, right? He talks about mind at large, and that our brains are a reducing valve. And thank God we have that reducing valve. We do psychedelics or other ways, like a traumatic birth can do this, different ways of prayer and meditation can open that reducing valve. And then we're wide open to all kinds of stuff. And if we didn't have a reducing valve, it'd be very difficult to live, right, as humans. So it's kind of closed until we decide to do a big fat journey and open it up. So the shadow. How many of you are familiar with your shadow or know about shadow work? Carl Jung, these are the gifts he gave us. The shadow, it's a repository of the repressed and denied aspects of ourselves. You can think of this back to that slide on the ego I talked about. It's a structure we have. And we have that for good reason. And we develop it over time, since the time we're born, and we take in qualities from our family and primary caregivers that we take the ones that are deemed as good or bad according to our family and develop. But there's an awful lot about us that we cast off in order to be accepted by our family and our society. There's our shadow. That's the shadow. Plotkin says that the shadow can be a prison for what the ego considers unacceptable, but it's also a huge storeroom for preserving and safeguarding the inestimable psychological treasures that our ego is not yet mature enough to embrace. Ultimately, they're all treasures. So our job is to go in, retrieve, and reclaim them of what we've cast away. And this is hard because it's all been so unconscious all of our lives. So we go in and reclaim them, but then at first our ego, it's like, no, this is it's divine or devilish. It's either or, right? We like that, either or. And then we move into, gosh, it's not me, but it's a part of me. And then eventually we start to go, okay, this is indispensable to be the real me, to bring this all into ourselves. And then the golden shadow, he talks about it's not all so dark, right? This is our gold. It's your submerged creative potential in all of us. He said, this quote from Johnson says, to draw the skeletons out of the closet is relatively easy, but to own the gold in your shadow is terrifying. It is more disrupting to find that you have a profound nobility of character than to find out you're a bum. Right? Yeah. I thought it could be helpful to really bring these concepts around with the shadow. If you wouldn't mind, would you like to hear one of my personal stories of shadow? Would that be helpful?
Yeah.
So I grew up in a very strict household with a dominant father and very powerful and very masculine. And I felt powerless as a child. And that powerlessness, I ended up casting away for myself and moving into positions of power to survive, right? And those positions of power were, like I said, highly masculine. I played sports in college. I became a firefighter, for crying out loud, followed in his footsteps. So I think I've got it all figured out, and things are good, and then this one time at Burning Man. This one time at Burning Man. How many of you have been to Burning Man? Okay, couple? Okay, so I go to Burning Man 2006, and I'm with a group of close friends. And mind you guys, I had never done drugs, ever. I was drug tested all through college for sports, and I was very afraid of them. I ended up doing some MDMA out there, and it just blew the doors off, and my heart opened wide, and I was just confronted with the fact that I was out of alignment with my life. I ran smack into my shadow. Like Joseph Campbell says, I got to the top of my ladder and realized the ladder was on the wrong building. So the work started there of integrating and also making that painful decision with individuation, with that info of, oh gosh, I'm going to have to choose to lead where I want to go with my life and not follow someone else's dreams, but that's going to probably cause a lot of disturbance in my family. So it was both exhilarating and terrifying all at the same time. So that's an example of doing some shadow work. What else? Oh, this is a great slide before I move on. I love this one. It says, I should sit with more medicine. And then the shadow's tacking down at the title. It says, bro fucking integrating. Oh, God, you guys. This is where we're at. And there's so much availability with medicine, psychedelics right now. And then, but look, like we have to sit and listen. We got to sit and listen. And just tend to ourselves and get those messages, because sitting with more medicine, it's just, there's a lot of bypassing and you're missing out. So, and we can talk about that more, but you know, this can also be, that doing medicine work can be also a great way of distracting ourselves from our pain and our suffering. And I know that's so hard to go into, but that's, yeah. I love that picture. I think this was on one of the last presentations too, so this is cool. Okay, so Jung, the Negredo. How many of you guys are into alchemy? Any people into alchemy? You know the chemistry of metals, and Jung loved this because the Negredo is the blackening that happens when you're bringing all of your materials together to blacken them all out, and it's the step before the Philosopher's Stone. And the Philosopher's Stone is that substance that can turn basic metals into mercury, gold, or silver. So the light that comes through. So when you're in the Negredo, this blackness of a journey, let's say it again, this stuff I'm talking to applies to all kinds of things that can go on in your life with darkness. But you don't know what's going on. Nobody around you knows what's happening to you, but something's taking place. Some deep process dissolving you and making you into something new. And this is where we get into that confrontation and going in with our shadow. Jung used the Negredo as a metaphor for the dark night of the soul. Have you guys heard of the dark night of the soul? Know a little bit about it? Yeah. So dark night of the soul comes from St. John of the Cross. He was a Spanish mystic and poet. And he said that the process of purification and it's having this appreciation of it cleansing your life. These are big words from him. You know, he was part of the Carmelites, a Christian religious order, and he was trying to reform them with Teresa of Avila. And they didn't like it so much. So they put him in prison for about 8 months. And in that darkness, he wrote the poetry, and he wrote about this dark night of the soul. And he says, like the dark night of the soul, it's an intervention that's orchestrated by our soul. It's signaling us to get in touch with our true selves. And if we listen, the experience can take you to the next step of your growth, your spiritual growth as a human. And I love these quotes from him. He says, a dark night is a little like a pie in the face. It relieves you of the stuffy ego you've been wearing. And then you don't choose a dark night for yourself, it's given to you. Your job is to sit close to it and sift it for its gold. And then my very favorite that he says, the dark night saves you from being stuck in your small life. It makes you a hero. It grows you into your faith and into being a responsible member of your community. In your mother's womb, you are becoming a person. In your womb-like dark, you are becoming a soul. That was beautiful. So Jung, my very favorite that he gifted us is the collective unconscious. he and Freud split ways over this. Some of you might know about this a bit. Freud was more, what's in the unconscious is personal experiences. It's not all of this stuff you're talking about, this is, you sound crazy, and we're not going to be taken seriously in regard to what you're going in here. Jung was doing his own deep dives and active imagination to dig into all of this imagery, all of this stuff, right? That reducing valve opening up and bringing in our ancestors, these forces that have been around forever that indigenous cultures know of and know how to move and be with it, all these forces. But he was pathologized, no such thing as external forces. And what else do I want to say about the collective unconscious? This is just the territory, right, that we can get into when we're doing these dives into psychedelics, these ways of being. So it's no mystery to everybody in here probably that psychedelics are magnifiers. They can go in and magnify little things in our mind, and we think it's all about us. And they can magnify fields of different forces in our head, and it can really freak us out. And we think that it's all in our own mind and dealt with inside of our own head. That magnifying glass, just turning it up. And hyper-individualism begins, that it's all about the individual, and it's really not, right? It's really not. So that's what I want to get into. It's all about me, and it's not about me, right? This paradox, back to paradox, so much emphasis in our culture with the individual, and the rugged individual, the archetype of the hero. We love that, but it's not about that. It's not about that. First part of our life is naturally more directed at the self, at becoming somebody and emerging from the collective as a creative individual. But eventually that focus may diminish, and it gives way to a concern for the world around you and a deeper understanding about what life is all about. As your heart expands, you learn to love a world that needs your affection and service. And paradoxically, there's that word again, your sense of self intensifies. So learning that it's so much more than just about ourselves. How are we doing? Can I go a little bit deeper with you guys?
Yes.
Yeah? Should we open that door and get some air in?
Yes.
Woo! Can we open windows? Yeah. Okay. So,
The curtains are clipped.
yeah, let's go deeper. Get a drink, fan ourselves off. Okay. Just a little bit more. Okay. So this painting is by Ray Valdez. Does anybody know Ray here? He's a Native American artist in our town.
Is her neighbor?
He's from the Yaqui tribe of New Mexico. And he's been painting this sad native since probably around 2000 in lots of his art. And I have this piece in my office as a reminder. So we're going to go into some of the work by Joanna Macy. That's The Pain of the World. But first I want to read you one of my very favorite poems. One of my very favorites. This is by Joe Harjo, our first Native American poet laureate from the Muskogee tribe. And this is called Rabbit is Up to Tricks. All right. In a world long before this one, there was enough for everyone until somebody got out of line. We heard it was Rabbit fooling around with clay in the wind. Everybody was tired of his tricks and no one would play with him. He was lonely in this world, so Rabbit thought to make a person. And when he blew into the mouth of that crude figure to see what would happen, the clay man stood up. Rabbit showed the clay man how to steal a chicken. The clay man obeyed. Then Rabbit showed him how to steal corn. The clay man obeyed. Then he showed him how to steal someone else's wife. The clay man obeyed. Rabbit felt important and powerful. The clayman felt important and powerful. And once that clayman started, he could not stop. Once he took that chicken, he wanted all the chickens. And once he took that corn, he wanted all the corn. And once he took that wife, he wanted all the wives. He was insatiable. Then he had a taste of gold, and he wanted all the gold. Then it was land and anything else that he saw. His wanting only made him want more. Soon it was countries, and then it was trade. The wanting infected the earth. We lost track of the purpose and reason for our life. We began to forget our songs. We forgot our stories. We could no longer see or hear our ancestors or talk with each other across the kitchen table. Forests were being mowed down all over the world, and Rabbit had no place to play. Rabbit's trick had backfired. Rabbit tried to call the clayman back, but when the clayman wouldn't listen, Rabbit realized he'd made a clayman with no ears.
Oh no.
Yeah. Let's take a few minutes in your groups, and I'd like you to talk about what the experiences you're having and the feelings around the pain of the world. So much going on in our world right now. Just share. Just chat about it. I'll give you a few minutes. Okay, just a little bit more. Heavy topics, I know. We gotta go there. We gotta talk about this. So none of us are exempt from this pain that's going on because we're it. We're part of the earth. We're part of that one eternal being. So compassion, it means to suffer with, or suffering with, whether we are aware and conscious of it or not. The earth is sick, we're sick, and then we turn into blaming, and underneath that blame is all pain. I don't care what your views are on COVID, that is a sign of what is happening with our earth. And so because we're not able to feel and go into this, we blame. We blame. And pain's a warning signal, and it's designed for us to have remedial action with what we're doing. So Joanna Macy, she talks about that the problem, it doesn't lie with our pain for the world, but it's in our repression of it. So this repression is in our shadow. This is a big part of us as humans. So let's talk about a couple of the ways we repress these deep emotions. Our fear of pain. Francis Weller talks about having amnesia and anesthesia. We forget and we numb out. It is no surprise that we have an opioid crisis right now. And alcohol. Alcohol the stores were kept open and deemed what were they deemed?
Essential.
Yes, it's an essential service. Okay, come on. I mean, our fear of despair. This is a big one. If I allow myself to feel this despair, I may never come back. I will go crazy. If I let go into this, I don't know what's going to happen to me. So we block it. The fear of appearing morbid. We have campaigns for this. Don't worry, be happy. No bad days. And stickers. Fear of guilt. This is a presentation all in itself. With our ancestors, indigenous people, slavery, wars. I don't know if any of you have had, I would say, the good fortune to go into this in a journey, but this is some heavy shit. Fear of appearing weak or emotional. No fear. We have the stickers for that too. Have no fear. Or we like to explain and have linear thinking and theory and put it in boxes and just stay up here and not feel what's really happening. Our fear of powerlessness. Well, our country especially, we really don't like to be powerlessness, so we're going to declare a war on everything. Okay? My second to last to read to you. Hang with me. This is The Fear of Grief. This is Francis Weller's work. And this comes from a book that's a must read, The Wild Edge of Sorrow. So, we live, however, in a grief-phobic and death-denying society. Consequently, grief and death has been relegated to what Carl Jung calls the shadow. Cultures also send aspects of psychic life into the shadow. Our refusal to acknowledge grief and death has twisted us into a culture riddled with death. One of Jung's more chilling observations that is whatever we put into the shadow, it doesn't just sit there passively waiting to be reclaimed and redeemed. It regresses and it becomes more primitive. Consequently, death rattles through our streets daily in school shootings, suicides, murders, overdoses, and gang violence. Needless to say, many of us limp through our lives carrying the scars of our death-dealing society. Unfortunately, the fingers of death extend far beyond the streets of our cities. Hillsides are stripped of trees, leaving homeless the countless others who once dwelled within canopies, along creek beds, and in the underbrush. Mountains are destroyed for coal or copper. Oceans are mined and emptied of fish. Creatures who dwell underground in direct conversation with the living earth through their teeth, claws, and bellies are bulldozed away from malls or subdivisions. Death pervades our culture, becoming a presence we cannot contain or ultimately honor. We export our machinery of death to other lands through armadas of weapons, chemicals that poison watersheds, and in our support of tyrannical governments. Many more are caught in the rapacious appetites of corporate profiteers as they loot and plunder indigenous lands for oil and precious commodities, all with our tacit agreement and our denial intact. Bringing grief and death out of the shadow is our spiritual responsibility and our sacred duty. I'm going to read that line again. Bringing grief and death out of the shadow is our spiritual responsibility and our sacred duty. By doing so, we may be able to feel our desire for life once again and remember who we are, where we belong, and what is sacred. Francis Weller. We've come full circle. Take a look at what the two top dimensions are. Our fear and our grief. Our fear and our grief. Francis says, when our grief can't be spoken for, it falls into the shadow and it re-arises in us as symptoms, us humans. So many of us are depressed, anxious, and lonely, and we struggle with addictions and find ourselves moving at a breathless pace, trying to keep up with the machinery of our culture. So hard to be human at times. So, people often ask Dr. Jung, will we make it? Referring to the cataclysm of our time. It's always a cataclysm, huh? He always replied, if enough people will do their inner work, this soul work is the one thing that will pull us through any emergency. Yes, and paradox. What if this is all way too much emphasis on the individual? Can we expect an individual to be the processing unit for all the pain of the world? Just can't. We need community and we need each other. And we need each other while we're doing these big journeys, all this psychedelic work. I'm excited for it, and I'm also scared about it at times too. Okay? So in the end, we're all just walking each other home. We're all dust there. And then just 2 more slides and a poem for you guys. I wanted to just talk a few things out of my head here about descending consciously. So think about this for yourself. Why are you interested in doing journey medicine psychedelic work? How are you walking on this earth? How are you being? Who are your elders? Who's guiding you? Are you part of a community? The medicine path is all about right relationship. And what do I mean about right relationship? It's coming in a good way. Reverence, humility, and open heart, allowing to learn from the medicine and its guidance. One of our teachers says, do you work for the medicine or do you think that it works for you? Are you a vessel for that medicine, to the messages you get? Are you listening? Are you listening? Relationship with yourself. Do you have a relationship with your grief? Do you have a relationship with nature? Do you have a relationship with paradox? Can we sit with paradox without losing our minds? Tending to your trauma, again, presentation, all of it itself. We go where our defenses allow us. Think of Jenga, doing Jenga, and you're pulling those so quickly, and it's collapsing, right? We're given what we're ready to receive. So going slow, having your own therapist, really tending to yourself. What are your distractions? Right? The distractions, back to what Bill Plotkin says, all of our distractions that muffle our soul. Listening and patience, again, the slowing down. Just having curiosity, being curious about yourself in all of this world. It's so incredible. Watching, reading, learning, asking, humility, meditation, gardening, nature, your music, your art, the storytelling, vision quests, tending to your dreams. Kate, we have a dream circle that meets here, right? That you guys talk about dreams and
one of the
activation.
integration circles that Kathy facilitates.
Yes.
Is Symbols and Meaning. It's based on the Ullman method where dream work.
Okay, yeah, Kathy's here tonight. We can talk about that more after for sure. It's such an awesome integration tool. And then numinosity entails numinosity. That's the great mystery of the force of life that Jung would talk about. The awe and the wonder. Sarah McLachlan has one of the best songs, and it's called Bring on the Wonder. She says, bring on the wonder, bring on the song. I pushed you down deep in my soul for too long. Makes me cry. So, last poem. Thanks, and I'll see if I can get through this without crying. This is William Stanley Merwin. Listen, with the night falling, we are saying thank you. We are stopping on the bridges to bow from the railings. We are running out of the glass rooms with mouths full of food to look at the sky and say thank you. We are standing by the water, thanking it. Standing by the windows, looking out in our directions. Back from a series of hospitals, back from a mugging, after funerals, we are saying thank you. After the news of the dead, whether we knew them or not, we're saying thank you. Over telephones, we're saying thank you. In doorways and in the backs of cars and in elevators. Remembering wars and the police at the door and the beatings on the stairs, we're saying thank you. In the banks, we're saying thank you. In the faces of the officials and the rich and all of those that will never change, we go on saying thank you. With the animals dying around us, taking our feelings, we are saying thank you. With the forest falling faster than the minutes of our lives, we're saying thank you. With the words going out like cells of a brain, with the cities growing over us, we are saying thank you, faster and faster. With nobody listening, we're saying thank you. Thank you, we are saying, and we're waving, dark though it is. So thanks. That went really long. I know you guys are probably tired, so I'm sorry. No, that was so These are some of the books that framed this presentation that are kind of, like I said, you're my book mentor people, my people. So you can take a photo of the slide if you want to read on more, some light reading.